Welcome, everyone. I'm Stephanie Guerra with Fair in Education. And this is our monthly speaker series for educators and others interested in issues in K-12 education. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Robert Pondicio, who's made major contributions to the field of K-12 with his writing and research. Robert Pondicio is a senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on K-12 education, curriculum, teaching, school choice, and charter schooling. Mr. Pondicio is the author of many books, including How the Other Half Learns, Equality, Excellence, and the Battle Over School Choice, which is a fantastic book. I just read it and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I hope everyone grabs a copy. So, Robert, let's just jump right in with the title of our webinar, which I love, and thank you for suggesting it. We've made teaching too hard for mere mortals. How have we done that?
Oh, an hour might not be enough time, Stephanie. That title actually comes from a piece that I wrote several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, for a magazine called Education Next, which is published by the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It has the unique distinction, I think, of being the most downloaded article at EdNext in 2 non-consecutive years. Like, in other words, when it came out, it got passed around quite a bit, and then it must have ended up on a syllabus somewhere and had a second life a few years later. But look, I mean, I should start by just kind of, giving my background a little bit and how I came to write about these topics in general. So I'm a former 5th grade teacher. I had a whole life in the media world. I worked for Time Magazine and Business Week for the first half of my career. And then in what when I'm feeling candid, call a mid-career impulse purchase, I signed up for the New York City Teaching Fellows, which is an alternative certification program in New York City. And I ended up teaching at PS 277 in the South Bronx, teaching 5th grade. If those of you who don't know New York City, it's obviously it's the largest school district in the country, is divided into about 3 dozen community school districts. The South Bronx District 7 is the lowest scoring district in New York City. My school, PS 277, was and still is the lowest scoring school in District 7. So I brought kind of an unvarnished view, I suppose, to that work. I signed up for 2 years. I stayed for 5, never left education, and got very, very interested in curriculum and instruction. That's most of what I focus on in my work at AEI and the writing that I do. So how do we make teaching too hard for mere mortals? Well, good Lord, anybody who's been a teacher probably viscerally understands and remembers their first years of teaching. It's a hazing ritual, for Pete's sake. And with all due respect to my colleagues in the ed school world, you're not prepared by ed school for the realities of classroom life, and then I've joked for years that if we trained teachers the way that we train air traffic controllers, we would tell air traffic controllers, "Oh, what, you think you're the first person to, steer a plane into a mountain? Hank, when my first year, I drove 3 planes into a mountain. Don't worry, it gets better." In other words, it's just there's not a lot of practical training that goes into teacher preparation. I mean, training itself is a dirty word. We don't train teachers. We're concerned with their dispositions. So even though I was alternative certification, I think it's a fairly common experience that teachers get just thrown into the mix, and then you're asked to figure it out on the job, figure out how to manage your classroom, how to, one of the reason I'm a curriculum advocate and spend so much of my time focused on curriculum is one of my, early memories of teaching was asking my staff developer from, Lucy Calkins' Teachers College Reading and Writing Program, what's my curriculum? What am I supposed to teach? And being told, well, Mr. Pondicio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. I'm like, you're making fun of me, right? That can't be serious. Where's my curriculum? But then I spent, 10, 20, 30 hours a week, as we all do, on, Google and Pinterest. And Teachers Pay Teachers didn't exist back then. But, then as now, you've got teachers forever just working as many hours out of school as they do in school, trying to make up for that lack of materials that you get as a new teacher. And then on top of that, we're supposed to, build relationships with families. And now when I'm I don't want to be too strident about this, but as a skeptic about social and emotional learning, well, now we're supposed to, be, attending to children's mental health needs in addition. In other words, I don't think I'm overstating the case, Stephanie, to say that, we give teachers too many things to do, and when you give somebody too many things to do, they can do none of them well.
I think that's a really fair statement. It's as though the role is expanding,
Yeah.
right? It has been for some time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We treat schools increasingly as not just places for education, but in and this, I'm not critical of this. This is important. In low income communities, we feed families. I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that there's an impulse now at Loose and Land to kind of treat schools as the social services agencies of first and last resort, and that all falls on the backs of teachers. And then we wonder why they struggle to do their basic job. Well, because we're asking an awful lot of them.
That's a great answer. And you're exactly right. And I feel like your latest essay really offered some great solutions to that problem. So right in that first paragraph, you recommend that, I'm going to quote you, policymakers and educators should come together and work to reform the slapdash and unchallenging curriculum that defines many American classrooms and craft new knowledge-rich materials that align with high standards. So do we need to craft materials? Could we locate some of these? Is it a combination of the two? And what should teachers and school leaders be looking for? What is a comprehensive, content-rich
Yeah,
curriculum?
no, thank you. I mean, I should, confess my bias right at the front. And this is born of my experience teaching in the South Bronx for those years. I am an, unapologetic disciple of a guy named E.D. Hirsch Jr., who, older members of our audience will remember wrote this book called Cultural Literacy 40 years ago, and has written, since then extensively, making the case for a knowledge-rich, language-rich, comprehensive, coherent curriculum. And I alluded before, like that was one of the things I was not given, and why I struggled so much in my classroom. Um, it just seems, and look, to be fair, we're having a bit of a curriculum moment right now in this country, both with the so-called science of reading movement, and in many states, the so-called HQIM, or high quality instructional materials movement. And these are very, very good things, right? I've been me, and I'm sure you and others have been, banging on this drum for a very long time. That's one of the ways that we can make the teacher's life a little bit easier, is by giving them a curriculum. That said, curriculum is kind of the red-haired stepchild of American education. We are socialized as teachers, as I was, to think, hey, Mr. Pondicio, you're the best person to know what your students need. Well, am I really? The reason I became a disciple of E.D. Hirsch Jr. Is because, and I've said this over and over for 20 years now, his body of work was the one body of work that described what I saw in my South Bronx classroom every day. Kids who could decode, who they could read the words on the page, but struggled to read with comprehension. Now my staff developers and others had all kind of, reasons to explain this away. Well, it's because the curriculum isn't culturally responsive. It doesn't reflect their interests. It's not engaging. Hirsch is the guy then and now who would say, no, it's background knowledge. It's vocabulary. That, and for complicated reasons that we probably don't have time to unpack, we think of reading, if we think of it at all, those of us who are good readers don't really think about our reading ability. But if we were to reflect on it for a moment, we would probably agree, incorrectly, that it's a skill, right? Like riding a bike or throwing a ball. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you don't have to learn how to ride a new bike. You already know. You pedal, you balance. You can ride virtually any bike. Well, it's the same thing with reading, right? Reading is reading is reading. Once you learn how to decode and know if you know what most of the words mean, then you can read anything, right? Well, not really. It's a lot more complicated than that. Reading comprehension is what, cognitive scientists like my friend Dan Willingham at the University of Virginia would call domain specific. In other words, you need to know a little bit about the topic, and sometimes a lot about the topic, in order to comprehend. But that's not the way I was taught to teach reading. And I think even though we're having a science of reading moment, my best guess is that the default mode of reading instruction in this country is still decoding, where which is good and important, but then comprehension skills and strategies. This idea that reading is a transferable skill, and it's not. I can read about baseball and understand, because I know baseball really, really well. If you give me an article about feng shui or something, then I'm going to struggle. I say this to people all the time. Like, if you want to know what it's like to be a struggling fourth grader, pick up a college textbook about a subject you know nothing about, or if you're not technologically inclined, like, read the instructions for installing the operating system on your computer. You will literally feel yourself, like, you'll follow along with the words, you'll feel your lips moving. It's not that you suddenly became a bad reader, you're just reading about a topic about which you have no background knowledge. So we know that reading requires a certain amount of background knowledge and vocabulary, but we still, in the main, persist in this idea that we can teach comprehension strategies and teach reading as a transferable skill. That was a really long-winded answer, but I think it's important, because it gets to, I mean, I'm being selfish here, but that's why do I do the work that I do? It's because of that. It's mostly surrounding just trying to wrestle to the ground these kind of these incorrect notions that we have about reading and reading comprehension.
Oh, thank you for doing that work. It's so wonderful. And I feel as if we're in a moment right now with that groundbreaking podcast, the investigative journalism sold a story.
Yeah, yeah.
Wait, for those in our audience, I'll be sending out a follow-up email, including the resources and links to all the things that we mentioned, including a list of curricular resources that Robert recommends. But yeah, I think there is a growing recognition. Last I heard, 17 states had already enacted legislation to change their approach to reading instruction. It's the science of reading movement, as you mentioned,
It's
right?
more
And
than
there
that. I think it's all but three or four at this point.
my understanding is they're in the pipeline. There are some that have
Maybe.
passed, and there are others that are taking action, but they haven't passed all the way through state legislatures. But
Well, can we talk about that for a second? Because this is, I'm going to ride a hobby horse of mine here. Um, I've been, frankly, and I'll tell on myself here. So when I left the classroom to go into the ed policy world, it was a surprise to me, and not a pleasant one, to find out that they spend all their time talking about things like, charter schools and teacher quality and testing and standards and accountability. And I like those things just fine. But I'm the weirdo then and now who says, hey, can we talk about what the kids do all day? Can we talk about curriculum and instruction? And it was kind of a surprise to me that folks in the policy world don't really talk about that stuff that much, as if it's all settled. Um, which, is, I've nattered on for years about how, if we'd spent the last 25 years trying to improve, curriculum and instruction the way we were trying to improve, governance structures and these other things that policymakers do, we'd probably be further along. So on the one hand, Stephanie, I am applauding the fact that in state houses all across this country, you've got legislators, taking a serious look at the so-called science of reading and ensuring that teachers are trained in it and whatnot. That said, you knew there was a but coming. You got to be a little bit skeptical about improving classroom practice from afar. You don't improve. I can't be the guy who said, as I just did a few moments ago, you're holding me accountable for stuff I was never trained to do and don't know anything about, and then say the solution is more of that. So it's great that we are having a burgeoning awareness that we've been, to use Emily Hanford's phrase, sold a story as teachers. But I mean, you're not going to fix this in state capitals. You've got to fix this in schools of education. You've got to fix this with increased sophistication on the part of teachers and administrators. I frankly worry about this. In other words, and I've talked to, frankly, a number of state education chiefs about this. If the fix is, well, we just need to train teachers in the science of reading, I'm like, maybe not. Do I really need to, study morphology and orthography extensively if you're still going to ask me to make my own damn curriculum, forgive my language, then we're not going to get any further here. In other words, what we really need are sound, useful instructional tools, curriculum, materials that are grounded in the science of reading. But if all it is, oh, you were doing it wrong, now we're going to teach you how to create better materials, color me skeptical that that's going to move the needle.
I hear you. I hear you. So what do you recommend to school leaders right now who want to follow your recommendations and find comprehensive, content-rich curricula? Where do they look? What steps should they take?
Yeah, it's, thanks for asking. That's kind of the soul of the work that I do is curriculum and instruction. So, I mean, look, there's any number of good resources. For years, we were dependent upon Ed Reports, and I'm not an Ed Reports basher. That said, Ed Reports doesn't necessarily have the most sophisticated view of curriculum. They tend to look at it for alignment with standards, with usability. Those are good things. I'm in favor of those things. I'll brag on myself. I was the founder of the Knowledge Matters campaign about a decade ago, which has really taken off. It's taken off because somebody else smarter than me is now running it. But they do pretty good evaluations of curriculum, which you should look at. The Reading League. I now, in full disclosure, I've not had a chance to look at this work, but just within the last week or so, the Reading League, which is comprised of hundreds of teachers, like, so not stuffed shirt pundits like me, but people who are actually, in classrooms doing the work, has begun to publish curriculum evaluations, and they have a good lens on this as well. So there are suddenly where before, it was like, oh, I'm listening to the publisher and they're taking me out to a nice lunch or whatnot and giving me a nice presentation. Now there are real serious tools out there that school leaders and frankly school boards can use to evaluate curriculum.
That's wonderful. And I'm looking forward to taking a look at the Reading League recommendations. That wasn't on my radar. So thank you. Okay, so, I'm going to quote your essay one more time and dig into some more prescriptive feedback that you gave. I loved this quote, and I want to talk a little bit about the how. So, in sum, spending hours on customizing curriculum or creating units and lessons from scratch is burdensome, results in lessons of low rigor and quality, and is almost certainly a less valuable use of teacher time than studying student work, giving feedback, developing subject matter expertise, and building relationships with students and their families. Well said. That is exactly right. So I want to dig into the piece about feedback in particular, because in my experience, giving meaningful feedback is both one of the most important aspects of supporting students and learning, and also one of the most difficult.
Yeah.
So, and many teachers really struggle to give meaningful feedback. So a lot of curricula can support that, but they can't supply that piece. That's got to come from the teacher. How do you recommend that we help teachers develop this particular skill?
Thank you. No, that's a great question. And I should back up a little bit. You're very nicely complimenting me on this essay, and we should tell folks where this was published. So the Hoover Institution out of Stanford University did a series of papers on a nation at risk at 40, and mine is about, I think it's titled "The Case for Curriculum." It was just republished by the 74, which is an education website. So if you search the 74 and the case for curriculum, or my last name and the case for curriculum, you'll find this deathless paper. But look, I mean, this gets to the heart of why I became a curriculum guy. And sometimes when people listen to me talk about this, they'll say, "Hey, Mr. Panicio, you're trying to take away my autonomy." It's like, no, I'm not. This gets back to this idea of the one thing we can't give teachers more of is time. There's 24 hours a day, got to sleep for at least a few of them. And those hours that you spend on Teachers Pay Teachers or Share My Lesson or just creating your materials from scratch is time that you don't get to spend on those other things like studying student work, developing expertise, building relationships, giving feedback. Now, look, if I'm going to, cross-examine myself here, Stephanie, I'm going to call myself out and say, hey, but the research literature says that when teachers give feedback, it's bad. And sometimes is even counterproductive. And that is true. But that's also because we don't know how to do it. It's not part of our skill set. So my argument, I suppose, would be, let's reallocate those hours. Look, not all of them. You're never going to get out of the business of customizing curriculum entirely. That's not what I'm saying. but we spend way too much time valorizing this idea that you have to create everything. It has to be bespoke. You have to create it, curate it, figure out just the right thing that's going to reach just the 20 or 30 students in your room. That's kind of a false orthodoxy. So I simply am arguing that we would get better results, or let me say it differently. There are certain things that only the teacher can do by physical proximity. Nobody else can look at that student's work. Nobody else can give them feedback. Nobody else can develop that relationship with students and their families, etc. Somebody else can write the curriculum, right? So even if your lessons are the greatest thing since sliced bread with raisins, that's one thing we can probably take off, not probably, we can and should take off the teacher's plate and let somebody else do it to create the bandwidth to do those other things, and frankly, to get more skilled at it. Or said differently, what's going to further student outcomes? You're spending 20 or 30 hours a week creating your own lessons, or you're spending 20 or 30 hours a week giving feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, the meaningful feedback is absolutely key. So do you think that professional development is the way to help teachers develop the skill? Is it coaching? Is it more instructional coaches coming in to support teachers in the classroom? Is it a combination? I mean, is it maybe the use of faculty meeting time? There are different corners and ways that can become a focus, but I do think teachers need structured support.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I'm not suggesting that if you push this button here, then you get good results there. And look, at the end of the day, I guess I'm making an argument for just changing the culture of teaching. We
Mhm.
shouldn't expect teachers to do all of these things and expect them to do it at an expert level. Look, even the basic job of instructional design and instructional delivery, both of those are incredibly difficult. To do both at a high level is literally, to our previous point, making the job too hard for mere mortals. I mean, as is my wont, I make jokes about this, but I mean, nobody ever says to Yo-Yo Ma, well, like, look, you're a good cello player, but it's not like you wrote the Brandenburg concertos. We never say to an actor, yeah, okay, nice job, but Hamlet, yeah, that was Shakespeare, right? So those were not your words. You should meet the audience's needs where they are. Like, this is just crazy. Like, so, but if you're a teacher, then you're expected to, to use another analogy, it'd be like running a restaurant where you are not only the chef and the waiter, but you're also doing the grocery shopping. And frankly, you're probably the farmer, like, because you gotta grow the food that you're going to serve. It's when you think about it in terms of just there's the series of demands we put on teachers' plate. It's crazy, and then we wonder why they burn out and quit. It is just a damn hard job. So I look, if you don't think that curriculum is the thing that we should take off, curriculum design, lesson plan design, if you don't think that's the thing that we should take teachers off their plate to make their lives more manageable, well, then I'm open to other suggestions. Tell me what you got in mind.
I'm not arguing. I totally
No,
agree with
no,
you.
no, understood. But I mean, I think this should be a conversation for the field, Stephanie. In other words, let's be really, really candid, okay? And I think I was as candid in this paper as I'm willing to be, because I'm not a teacher basher and I don't want to be perceived as one. But I point out that, look, you've got nearly 4 million teachers in American classrooms, okay? For years, we have, and I say this now, as a friendly critique of my fellow policy people. For years, we have said, or functionally said to teachers, you know what to do. We're going to hold you accountable for doing it. Well, or we have valorized ideas to improve teacher quality through accountability, through training. Um, if you've got 4 million men and women of doing anything, by definition, a number that large means you're going to have people of ordinary sentience, not saints and superstars. The good Lord did not make 4 million saints and superstars. So you've got to make the job doable by the people you have, right? Look, this is a little bit of coals to Newcastle, I suppose. If anybody who's listening to us tonight, if you're making time on your own to like listen to a webinar about teaching after school hours, you're not an ordinary teacher. Okay, you are somebody who is, at the let's see, the right side of the bell curve. we're talking about everybody else, right? How do you make this job doable by those people? Because you're not going to find 4 million people who are going to live, breathe, eat and sleep this stuff. So rather than try to improve teacher quality through various mechanisms, my plea is, can we start to think about how do we make this job doable by the teachers we have, not the teachers we wish we had?
I think that's a poignant way to put it, and I agree with you. Um, so, circling back to professional development, I was really struck by some data that you cited that only an average of 1.1 day per year is devoted to curriculum,
Yeah.
right? And so let's assume that a really high quality curriculum is in place for the given content area. What needs to happen next?
Well, I
What
I think that's a good indicator, Stephanie, of how, I referred semi-seriously to curriculum as the redheaded stepchild of education. That's the proof point. In other words, if we were really serious about what kids did all day, if we were really serious about creating a coherent, cumulative, sequential learning experience from one end of a child's education to the other, well, then that 1.1 day of PD would be proof that we are not really serious about this. What is PD about? It's about the latest initiative from the district. Is about classroom management. It's about whatever your union chapter leader wants to talk about. It's some administrative. It's time to grade tests, etc. It's just basically frittered away. So I think that's, and by the way, I bring this up because when I wrote that paper that we're discussing, my friend Mike Petrilli, the head of the Fordham Institute where I used to work, said, "Come on, Robert, you're overstating things. We're having this science of reading movement. We're having this HQIA movement. Surely it's getting better." And my pushback was exactly that. I'll know it's getting better, not when we're adopting or not when we're purchasing curriculum, but when we are really taking it seriously, when that culture of teaching changes, when we put it at the center of teacher training, professional development, professional learning groups, and whatnot. Until then, and in fact, I've been saying this a lot lately. I'm training myself to not even use you heard me just catch myself. I don't say curriculum adoption anymore, right? Because that adoption means you do all those other things. You take it seriously. This is the meat of what we do in the classroom. So now I say curriculum purchases, because that's what this really is. We're purchasing high quality instructional materials at a record pace, and God bless, but the jury's still out on the degree to which we are actually adopting them.
I love that distinction. I think we need to keep using that exact terminology because it captures this really important discrepancy. And I feel as if, we throw out millions of dollars at various curricula and ed tech packages, but that difference between just purchasing and actually adopting is committing something. We also
Right.
have record in our country of flitting from reform to reform and
Mhm.
from curriculum to curriculum just in a couple short years. And we all know, especially for veteran teachers, it takes sometimes years to be, first of all, convinced of
Yeah.
the worth of a new curriculum, willing to change ways, and also to get the professional development to learn how to do so. So yeah, I agree with you there. That's another missing ingredient in the pie that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and look, to play devil's advocate, there is a laudable impatience, right? In other words, my students were only in fifth grade once. Okay, a couple of them twice, a couple of them more than that. But in the main, a kid's only, in your class for a year. They only get to do second grade once, third grade once, etc. So you don't necessarily have the time, or we should understand the clock is ticking, not for us, but for them. So the desire for immediate results it comes from a good place, as they say. But I've also said for years, you show me a miracle and I'll show you a scandal. Like, in other words, when you see a sudden rise in test scores, then something's going on with that, and it's usually something unholy. So yeah, it does take some time to implement well. You hit the nail on the head. One of the biggest problems with changing curriculum is getting veteran teachers to change their practice, to be convinced that there's value in this new thing, assuming that it's a good curriculum, obviously. There's so many moving parts. So yeah, it is not. And look, I've crossed swords honestly with some of my fellow curriculum advocates who, either believe or let stand the uncorrected impression that once you purchase, and there's that word again, once you purchase HQIM, problem solved. It doesn't work that way. I mean, it is a long, laborious process of changing practice. I mean, quick war story. I worked for a time for the Core Knowledge Foundation. I'm a fan of Don Hirsch and Core Knowledge. And at one point, New York State, through its Engage New York website, made Core Knowledge Language Arts the statewide curriculum, or at least made it available for on grades 3 through 5. And I went up to Albany and did the trainer things. And I listened to state officials encouraging teachers to, quote, adapt or adopt this curriculum. Like, time out. How about this? How about adopt or do not adopt? But if you adapt, then you're dabbling, right? You're just kind of playing around with this. And that's how we get into these messes, Stephanie. Like, oh, we tried that, it didn't work. Well, did you really try it? Did you put it at the center of your reform efforts? Did you do more than train the trainer a half a day at PD and then go with God? Is it part of your professional learning? Is it part of your ongoing PD? If you didn't do those things, you didn't adopt it, you adapted, you're dabbling. And my sympathy there is with curriculum developers who say like who say all the time like, well, it wasn't adapted with or adopted with fidelity. They're not wrong, but it's just, again, it's I know I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but it's that culture of education, both in terms of our reluctance to change practice and our impatience with the results that kind of turn this into a bit of a hamster wheel that we're forever. What did you just say? Like that we change the pace of reform. It's just one thing after another, and then we wonder why teachers are burnt out and cynical about it.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a wonderful book. I mean, the title captures it, Tinkering Toward Utopia. It was written back in the 90s, but
On the shelf behind.
that captures it. If you want to learn about the history of school reform in our country, Tinkering Toward Utopia, and we're still doing it. So,
Larry is Cuban and
Hayek.
Larry Hayek. Thank you. That's right.
So, you're making me think about Success Academy, where you taught and observed, and which is the subject of your most recent book, which is, again, phenomenal. Thank you for doing that research. Very readable, too. It's a page turner. So tell us a little bit about why and how Success Academy has achieved such impressive results.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of the backstory first. So, I was talking earlier about my teaching background in the South Bronx, lowest performing school, lowest performing district in New York City. Well, after leaving the classroom and, starting to study this stuff and write about it, there were no charter schools or maybe one. I think literally the second KIPP school in America opened a few blocks from my elementary school when I was teaching there. So a few years later, along comes, New York City for a while was this hotbed of, so-called high-performing charter schools, and none more high-performing than Success Academy, led by a woman named Eva Moskowitz. And every year they would just post these extraordinary results, like too good to be true results. And at one point, I was right after the Common Core hit. If you remember, when the Common Core standards and the associated tests came out about 10 years ago, everybody just took a haircut, right? Like the test results, which had been wildly overinflated, at least in New York and probably elsewhere, just nosedived, but not at Success Academy. They went up. And I remember writing a piece for the New York Daily News at the time, and hopefully some folks are know sports and will get the analogy. I concluded the piece by asking: is Eva Moskowitz the Michael Jordan of education or the Mark McGuire of education? Meaning, is she this kind of transcendentally talented, once in a generation athlete, or is she cheating? And look, honestly, if you'd asked me candidly off the record at the time, which do you think? I'd say she's got to be cheating. I said it before, you show me a miracle, you show me a scandal. And I concluded this piece by saying, look, somebody needs to get up to Harlem, which is where these schools were based, and figure out what the hell is going on up there. And then a few years later, I guess I took myself up on my own suggestion and I talked my way into Success Academy. And just to paint the picture for you, I spent a year embedded in one of their schools. I saw a lot of them, but I spent most of my time embedded in a South Bronx elementary school. It was literally across the street from where I'd been a student teacher and a few blocks away from where I was had been teaching fifth grade, and where my school was the lowest scoring school in the district. This school, Success Academy Bronx One, was I think one of the top 5 scoring elementary schools in the entire state of New York. Right. I'm very fond of saying that every story worth telling about education either quickly gets to, well, it's complicated or it's not worth telling. And this one is complicated because look, I think my ed reform credentials are in pretty good order, but I'll speak heresy. I think the ed reform movement has promoted the idea, and the charter school movement has promoted the idea that the only difference is the door the kid walks into in the morning. And in the case of New York City, it's in the same building because charter schools are co-located with regular district schools. So the conventional wisdom, the belief is that you go to a Success Academy, good result. You go to, PS 277, bad result. The only difference is that. And again, I'm a fan of charter schools. So measure that to what I'm about to say. When you embed, you learn that it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not a simple matter of the door they walk in. I don't think they're not cheating. But they do exercise a certain amount of I'm not going to call it control, but it's functionally a self-selection engine for engaged parents. In other words, they put any number of kind of not non-trivial hoops that parents have to jump over to make it into the school. So yes, it's an open lottery. But you've got to, you come to a welcome meeting, you do a confirm your interest email, you go to a uniform fitting, you have to show up and show up and show up and show up. So where the data that I showed in the book was that where on paper 1 out of 6 families win a lottery, your real odds of getting in are 1 out of 2. But more to the point, after going through this winnowing process, you end up with a parent body that is just deeply committed to this form of education. They're buying what Success Academy is selling. And let me be clear, that is not a criticism. Okay. That is, I think, a good thing. Because, for example, my child went private end to end. I was a public school kid. My wife was a private school girl. I've joked that private school was the price of peace in our house, and what a price. Why the reason I titled the book "How the Other Half Learns" is because we just apply different rules to low income families of color. So in other words, it was not controversial for me to take my child out of the public school system and send her to a private school. But when an Eva Moskowitz comes along and creates functionally the same kind of opportunity for low income families, now suddenly it's a crisis. Why is that? Why is it that I can do it uncontroversially, but when Mrs. Rodriguez does it, now this is a policy challenge. Does this make this, does this make this more difficult for the schools like mine, where I used to teach, that some of the most engaged families are leaving for charter schools? Yeah, it does, no question. And this is another thing that gets me in trouble with my fellow reformers, because the data shows that it creates a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's like, okay, I know what the data says, but I also know, when I reflect on my time teaching in the South Bronx, when I think about the kids who be most likely first out the door to take advantage of a charter school, of a Success Academy, there goes Tiffany, there goes J-Rod, there goes Dominique, there goes these kids who are like, teach me something, who are like, with me. And now that's going to make my job easier. That's going to make me better. I could not have worked any harder. Okay. I would not have been spurred to redouble my efforts. There was no redoubling to be done. So the conventional wisdom is, well, then, how can you favor charters, which make your life harder? My earnest answer is because it's America. Okay. I don't have the right to stand in the way of any family, rich and poor, and say, I'm sorry, you're a public resource and you must stay here for the benefit of other children. So if I have that luxury, that ability, that God-given right, frankly, as an American father to control my child's education and get the best opportunity for her, then who the hell am I to say to another family, sorry, I get that, but you don't.
Yes, absolutely. I hear you. That's actually something that really did strike me in your book was it's not just in the beginning, it's not just those hurdles, it's a continual accountability, the
Oh
success.
yeah.
Yeah, it seems as though parent involvement is almost a linchpin, and
Yeah,
there are expectations that, I mean, in my mind, many people would balk, right? So there is
and they
a,
do. And they
yeah.
do, no question. Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. I mean, I kind of drifted as is my want to do from your question, but that winnowing process, which I just defended, is absolutely an enabling condition that allows the way I think I put it in the book was it gets every adult in a child's life pulling on the oars in the same direction. So you are either staunchly in favor of what they're doing or you are willing to go along with it, and it does demand a lot of parents. Now, I mean, because I'm an elementary educator, I focus mostly on the elementary school experience, but you got to read with your child every night. You got to log the books. At one point, I don't think they're doing this anymore, but at one point they would literally send home parent report cards, not report cards to parents, report cards on parents, like which were grading the parents on how well they were supporting their children in the Success Academy program. Like, okay, you try that at an Upper East Side elementary school in Manhattan and see how long you last. Success, they were like, oh, okay, I guess I need to do better. It was a remarkable and unique school culture. And look, Stephanie, I mean, this is the key point. I mean, the reason why do you write a book like this? Why does a person like me who does what I do, why do I do a book like that? Because I'm looking for lessons. What are they doing that we can apply to K-12 at large? And so I'm sure I disappointed a number of people by saying, look, there's a limit to this. I mean, yeah, when you've got every adult in a child's life buying the program and reinforcing it at home, you can get astonishing results, and they do. But the idea that you can create that expectation across 55 million kids and parents with various levels of interest and engagement, that world does not exist. And I think we need to be honest about that as well.
Right. It's really important to stay reality based, right? Because the world of ed reform is full of promised silver bullets
Yeah.
and lofty aspirations. Staying reality based is key. Um, we're at just about quarter till, so I want to ask one last question and then save about 10-15 minutes for audience Q&A. So my last question is, what is your most important message for the parents in our audience? How can,
Oh, for parents.
yeah, how can they
Yeah.
have their schools to adopt, not just purchase, but adopt the kinds of curricula you've discussed?
Boy, we could do a whole other hour just talking about the relationship between parents and schools because it concerns me. And look, I'm not a teacher basher, but I can't help be honest about this. I mean, we're at a moment where a lot of us who are either classroom teachers or have been classroom teachers are bemoaning the lack of trust, the loss of trust in schools, in teachers, particularly as a result of COVID, where the school came onto the dining room table every day or kitchen table for a year and a half, and and sometimes parents were upset with what they were seeing. So it's very, very common for teachers to to be crestfallen about the loss of trust that parents have in schools and teachers. But if we're honest, and here we go again, you got to be honest about these things. It's a two-way street. We never talk about the data about the fairly low trust that teachers have in parents. Okay, EdChoice is an organization that regularly polls parents and teachers, and don't quote me because I don't have this in front of me, but from memory, they often ask teachers, who do you trust? And they rank them. I trust my administrators, my fellow teachers, my union chapter leaders. Parents almost always end up at the very bottom of the pile. So if you want to be trusted, you've got to give trust as well. You have to, I think, so this is a message for both parents and teachers, I suppose, is that trust really needs to be rebuilt. How do you rebuild it? Honesty and transparency. I just maybe I spent so long as a journalist, I just see no other way around this. Um, but the days when teachers just kind of say, trust me and send more money, and drop off your kid and I'll take care of it. Those days are over. We can't operate that anymore, operate that way anymore. Um, I'm a fan. I mean, this is controversial to some, but I'm a fan of curriculum transparency. The vast majority of us, we don't think of ourselves this way, but come on, we're public servants. Like, we are state actors. We are paid by taxpayers to provide a public service. We are not free agents. Okay, we don't have academic freedom. That's a higher ed thing. In K-12, we are government employees. That doesn't mean we're working at DMV or the post office selling stamps. Obviously, it's different being a teacher than being, than working for the Department of Public Works. But a certain amount of transparency just comes with the territory. And I think we need to be candid about that if we want to rebuild that trust. But to answer your question about what should parents do, I always point out that if you go to your pediatrician, because your child is ill and he gives you a prescription, you probably don't leave the parking lot before you're on your phone going on WebMD, looking at what this, the medication is, the side effects, etc. Ask yourself, mom and dad, what's the ELA curriculum in your child's school? What's the math curriculum? Nobody knows, and you should. In other words, you should be at least as curious. And again, I'm a curriculum guy, so of course I'm going to natter on about curriculum. But my wish for parents is that they would be at least as curious about what their child is doing in school all day. Not how was school today, honey? What's the curriculum? I can look at ed reports as a parent. I could look at the Knowledge Matters campaign. I could look at those reading league evaluations. Nothing's stopping from parents from doing that. It'd be nice if parents were as critical consumers of curriculum and instruction as they are about everything else their child interacts with.
Oh, that's so wise. And you're making me laugh because I have two teenagers, a graduating senior and a sophomore. And what you're bringing to mind, back when they entered elementary school, I was going through a school selection process, and I asked in each case, the different schools I was considering, I asked if I could just come and review their curriculum, and it was shocked them. They clearly had never heard it before, but I would.
Really?
Were very.
Nobody has asked for that.
I never asked for that. What I was essentially asking for is, can I come in and spend a half day just looking at the curricula, right, across the grade levels too? And they let me, and it was marvelously instructive. So I think that's fabulous advice. Now, I've so enjoyed this conversation. It has been a true pleasure. I would like to open up now for audience questions. So folks, if you have questions for Robert, please just go ahead and pop them in the Q&A.
But while you, if I can just add one more note, and this is back to Success Academy and another thing that parents can do. One of the policies that Success Academy had that I admired is an open door policy. Within certain limits, not during standardized testing or whatnot. But as a general rule, it was not that unusual to see a parent just show up in the classroom because they were encouraged to. Sure, come by any time, visit your child's class. I would be a little bit suspicious of any school or teacher that told me I was not welcome to come and just, yeah, you got an hour, come on, just sit in the back of the classroom and see what your child is doing all day. That I think that's a useful lens for parents as well.
That makes sense. So if you'll open the Q&A, Robert, I can read we have, looks like a number of great questions here. I'll start with reading out loud the first one. Can we talk about technology? I'm not convinced that it's producing favorable outcomes for students, especially in the elementary and even middle school grades. How can we get schools and districts to examine their use of tech to determine if it's improving student learning outcomes or if it's a hindrance?
What a great question. Thank you.
We need another webinar, Robert, because that
yeah,
one's.
Yeah. Well, okay, listen, let's seriously make plans for the webinar because I'm planning on spending the summer examining this question. And I'll tell you why. I have been for many years, frankly, an ed tech skeptic. There's so much old wine in new bottles and the shiny new thing. And, you digital natives and fill the classroom with technology and all will be well. And it's just completely untainted by evidence of effectiveness. But I'm not rethinking it, but I'm newly curious about the potential for AI, artificial intelligence. But as is my wont, I have a slightly unorthodox view because so much of the work that I do is not about anything other than improving teacher capacity. Everybody's talking about AI as student facing AI. I'm really curious about how can we do this or use AI, what I was discussing earlier, to get more out of the teachers we have. Somebody told me, and I hesitate to quote it because I haven't read it myself. There was a study somewhere that suggests that 20 to 25% of what a teacher does every day can be outsourced to AI. If that's the case, then it's another opportunity for teachers to get better at giving feedback, studying student work, et cetera. So my bias here again is that I'm a skeptic, and by but I'm enough of a rationalist to say let's not dismiss it out of hand. The one thing I will say, and this is a hill I'm willing to die on, the phones have got to go. I don't think there's a good case to be made anymore that phones are anything other than a hindrance. The amount of distraction that they create in a classroom, any perceived gain in learning, is not just mitigated, it's erased and then some by just the constant distraction of phones in classrooms. I'm pretty sure England, among other countries, is really having a strong move towards phone-free schools and classes, and that's something we need to start taking seriously here.
Oh, I could not agree with you more. That is the truth. Australia too, I believe, significant movement. All right, so since we have a number of questions and limited time, would you like to just pop open the Q&A and take a
Oh,
look at what's out?
sorry, yeah, here's a question. It seems that the curriculum needs to be user-friendly and often stunts teacher efficacy when they develop their lessons. They're working between what they see in their classrooms, which can be very challenging in terms of providing learning to meet students' needs for the curriculum needs. May have read that incorrectly. Curriculum is something people who don't really know the learners in classrooms develop. How do we make it easier so that teachers can focus on just reaching their learners? No, that's I hope I was clear on this. I'm not suggesting that we should turn teachers into robots and just read a script. Although that said, one of the most effective curricula is literally scripted. It's direct instruction. That's all it has is 50 years of a successful track record behind it. I'm merely saying that the pendulum has swung too far. I mean, in the same way, and in fact, I think I'm making a case, if anything, for more of that. You're no teacher should have to face what I faced every Sunday night, that empty plan book by their elbow and that thought of what the hell am I going to do tomorrow. By having thoughtful, well sequenced lessons, and by the way, this is something that needs to happen between and across grades to create a coherent learning experience. To use a football analogy, it gets you down inside the 20-yard line. Now you're teaching from the red zone, and I think it makes differentiation more effective. If I've left the impression that I don't want teachers to meet learners where they are, then I'll walk that back. I'm merely saying that no teacher should be starting from scratch.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right, how about this one? And by the way, there's one about direct instruction, but you just answered that one as well. Got wrapped in. Let's see, we get a lot of poorly researched evidence that certain things work. We also are told that certain things, that certain things are not evidence-based practices, yet they become a focus. How can we learn to effectively challenge poor evidence and data as teachers?
Yeah, skepticism is a virtue. Dan Wellingham, who's a good friend, who's a cognitive scientist at the University of Virginia. I think I invoked him earlier. He wrote a book not that long ago, and I think the title was "When Can You Trust the Experts?" Required reading for teachers. I'm also a big fan of an organization or a professional learning community, I guess you'd call it, that's huge everywhere but in America. It's called Research Ed. I just had the pleasure of presenting at a US Research Ed conference in Greenwich, Connecticut just a few weeks ago. These are conferences that are attended by in the UK, where they were founded by, like, I'm not kidding, 2,000 teachers go to a Research Ed conference in the UK. And here in the US, they're kind of a cult item. But I'm optimistic that we can grow that movement because it gets exactly to this idea. Everybody's going to tell you, oh, this is research based. Or this is proven. Everything works in Cincinnati, for example. Like, or I'm making that up, but like Dylan William, who I also met through Research Ed, is very fond of saying this thing about everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere. But as teachers, we have again, I think, just been kind of lulled into this idea that experts are telling us that this is research based and this is proven effective somewhere. So those look, we invoked Emily Hanford and sold a story before. This might be a good one to close on. Think of the meta theme of her work and why it's been so effective, and why it was called Sold a Story. Because for decades we were told that these demonstrably flawed ways of teaching reading were research based and were effective and were demonstrated effective. Um, Only they weren't. And who was telling us this? Experts, Lucy Calkins, Mary Clay, Fontes and Pinnell, etc. The reason I think that Emily Hanford's work has been so impactful was because along came somebody who basically said to teachers, look, it's not your fault. You're not the sinners here. You've been sinned against. And it was that culture of gurus and experts. So, hopefully that lesson will stick. That when somebody comes along and tells us, oh, we know this works. Well, then the first question will be, well, how do you know that it works? Now, look, I recognize, Stephanie, this is somewhat contradictory because on the one hand, I'm talking about making teachers' jobs easier. On the other hand, now here I am saying, hey, you need to become critical consumers of research. Maybe this is a job for ed schools and professional development. But we have been, I don't think it's overstating the case to say, a little bit betrayed, by that class of educator, those who are selling us that story and telling us things are evidence or research based when they are motivated, when they're trying to sell us a curriculum, a pedagogy, a program.
Absolutely. And, one of the easiest and most simple things to look for is a conflict of interest, right? There are lots of other, I think, questions that even non-researchers can ask about a piece of research. And I'll include some of those actually when we send the follow-up. I'll include a little piece on just sort of a questions that a layperson, if you will, can ask when something is touted as evidence for some particular curriculum or method. I have one more question. I really want to, we've got 2 minutes. Can I give you one? Because it circles back to your transparency. All right. So here's the question. I agree with everything you said about curriculum transparency. Seems like common sense.
But
so why do you think
there's a but coming.
Controversial? Why do you think it's controversial?
Well, I don't know that it is. That's a great question. Again, what one should not assume one's experience is universal. But I will say, I've been talking about this long enough that when I bring this up to teachers, and say, look, your job is too damn hard, and we need to make this job, sustainable and doable, again, by mere mortals, not saints and superstars. I don't get an adverse reaction to that. Where I get an adverse reaction is from people saying, you're trying to take away my autonomy. No, I'm not. You can't. At least under the teaching structure that we have right now, adult in the room, 25 kids. And by the way, there's other ways we could teach kids. That's a cultural habit. That's not going to go away. We like it. But as long as that's the dominant form of socializing kids and doing education, then you're not robbing the teacher of his or her autonomy. You're just focusing their efforts for maximum leverage. And look, if you were that person who that you really love the craft of lesson design and lesson, or and that, then that's fine. But understand, I think the onus is on you to show back to evidence that really is the best use of your time. That's how you're, because at the end of the day, our charge is it's not about what we enjoy doing, it's what's best for students. If you can demonstrate that the time you're spending creating or customizing your lessons is literally the thing that turbocharges student outcomes in your classroom, then I'm your fan. Okay, I'm not going to criticize that whatsoever. But I think for the vast majority of American teachers, it really does rob time away from more impactful things they could be doing.
Yes. Robert, we're at the hour. I have enjoyed this so much. This is
Ooh,
really lovely. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, for answering all of these questions. For all of you in the audience, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And I will, Robert's graciously offered, if your question wasn't answered and you would like to send it to the educator's account, I will Robert. And I will also again follow up with a list of recommended resources. So thank you. We hope you join us next month as we continue the series. And Robert, thank you again.
thank you, and thank you for supporting FAIR, which is an organization that's near and dear to my heart. So whenever FAIR asks me to do something, my answer is always yes. You just need to tell me what I'm saying yes to.